Licensed games are quite a tricky little bunch of dubious quality. If you're very fortunate, you'll get something truly good like GoldenEye 64 and Peter Jackson's King Kong. Sadly though, more often than not you get cheaply made trash like Superman 64 or Peter Jackson's King Kong on the DS. Likewise, a number of games have been made based off of Spongebob Squarepants, ranging from terrible to surprisingly good. One such game is Battle for Bikini Bottom that actually released on the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox, but just received a remake recently. Now for the obvious question, is this due to it being glorious like Rise the Triad or only being remade for laughs like Shaq Fu? Let's find out together as I review SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated for PC. You'll almost never find a licensed game that's trying to reinvent the wheel here. It's a safe bet that even the better ones will stick to a winning genre. That's not a critique, of course. Most games in general do that. You may as well stick to what works and try to make it refined and unique rather than risk it all on some never-before-seen idea. Battle for Bikini Bottom, which I'm going to shorten to BNBB for the sake of simplicity, is definitely heavily influenced by the 3D Mario games. It's mainly a platformer with some light combat capabilities thrown in. You grab as many collectibles as you can to unlock new areas, and you can even switch characters a la Mario and Luigi. I suppose I should start by talking about the platforming itself, since that's the main core of the game. I played the PC version, but with a USB controller of course, which I absolutely recommend heavily if you're going to be playing a 3D platformer such as this. With that kind of setup, I found the platforming to be very tight and responsive. While the analog stick was essentially adirectional due to being a WADS replacement, the game never felt like it was any kind of hassle to control. SpongeBob and friends controlled pretty much on the spot, and mapping the mouse to the second analog stick felt just fine for the times I had to actually aim. Each time I died, I'm pretty confident it was my own fault and something I needed to improve upon. Thankfully, one thing for Mario, this game does not carry over his limited lives. You have checkpoints you can return to upon your demise, but you don't have any limited lives, so that'll just keep happening forever. You can also get fast travel points in the form of cardboard boxes, of which you have to open both of them to freely travel through. Like Mario though, you do get a hub world of sorts wherein you access the other levels. You can also fast travel via taxi, but that's after you unlock the level in the first place. BFBB's central collectible is, of course, golden spatulas. There are a variety of ways you can collect the things, two of which in the hub world involve giving Patrick Socks or Mr.Krabs something called a shiny object. Amusingly, Patrick is one of the playable characters and he'll count it to give you a golden spatula even if he's the one who collected his own socks. He is Patrick though, so he gets a free pass. He's probably the one character you could justify with doing that with. Mr.Krabs is also characteristically greedy as the amount of shiny objects you need for one golden spatula rise substantially each time. The other golden spatulas can be achieved in a variety of ways, from helping Mrs.Puff round up students to winning races or beating mini bosses and bosses in some cases. Racing is almost always done down slopes, steering or jumping across obstacles and gaps. They tend to be pretty tricky, especially in cases where you have to beat a timer, but can be very rewarding to overcome. On the subject of playable characters, you get 3 of them to choose from. However, it's not an unlock once and done. Most levels only allow you to select from 2 of them. Now obviously SpongeBob's the main character, so he's always going to get the first slot, but the second one can either be Patrick or Sandy depending on the situation. They each come with their own set of abilities and ways of handling things, but I suppose I should start with a titular character first. SpongeBob Bob consists mainly of a bubble-based moveset. His basic attack is a bubble spin that he uses with his wand, which is sure to feel familiar to anyone who's played a Mario game with Mario's own spin-based attacks, such as Galaxy. He also possesses a bubble bash, wherein he makes a bubble Viking helmet and shoots upward like a rocket, attacking anything above him such as obstacles or robots. Bubble bounce is the opposite, wherein SpongeBob will bubble slam down to the ground from above. In addition to these bubble attacks, SpongeBob is also capable of sneaking. This is handy for sneaking up on shtikis, avoiding the wrath of sleepy time robots, or getting across fragile bridges without risking their collapse. SpongeBob also unlocks more moves from Bubble Buddy later on in the game, and they're necessary for completing Golden Spatula challenges and obliterating certain enemies. With a Bubble Bowl, SpongeBob rolls his arm until you let go, in which case he throws a bowling ball bubble, hopefully landing a strike rather than a gutter ball. Now SpongeBob moves forward to wind up his bowling ball, but there's a very simple fix for this. You ready? All you gotta do is figure out how far he goes forward and compensate for it. Believe it or not, there were people who actually complained about this, people who are being paid to make reviews about video games. You literally just compensate for the amount he steps forward. It's really easy to figure out if you've seen it once. I'm not saying that to trash on that other reviewer, I'm just saying. Perhaps SpongeBob's penultimate weapon is the cruise bubble. This is essentially a homing torpedo made out of bubbles. You steer the thing until you run out of time and it explodes or it hits a target, and also explodes. The underwater missile is capable of doing quite a lot of damage, able to damage essentially any normal enemy in the game, although SpongeBob's also vulnerable when he fires it, so be careful. Using it from a decent enough distance is a great way to pester certain enemies, and it's the only reliable way to destroy a stone tiki without accompanying thunder tikis. A couple of other things SpongeBob has are Spongeball and bungee jumps, but those are far more circumstantial. They aren't something you just have access to whenever you want. You find a corresponding ball power-up and SpongeBob turns into a ball, moving much faster and fitting into spaces he ordinarily couldn't before. Bungee jump is exactly how it sounds. SpongeBob bungees down and you can steer him to either make him grab things or smash tikis with. The other two are more straightforward, not getting any unlockable moves. Patrick Star is basically the big tank of the group, and his main attack is a belly attack where he uses his generous girth like a squishy wrecking ball. Like SpongeBob, he can also slam downwards in the air, although it's less bubble-based, and even creates a shockwave to dish out a bit of AoE damage to a crowd. His signature move is that he can pick up and throw things. That's Patrick for you with his simple but effective tactics. Throw fruit is typically used for hitting targets or even stacking on and climbing up, but it'll burst from decay before too long. Freezy fruit is an interesting one. It'll turn any body of goo frozen solid so you can walk across to find things on islands. Like with throw fruit though, the freezy fruit has a time limit before the goo thaws, so be quick about making it to your destination. Thankfully those destinations tend to have freezy fruit on them, so you don't have to worry about a round trip. Patrick can also pick up and throw robots, which is handy for destroying duplicators or just using the robots against themselves. Sandy Cheeks is perhaps my favorite of the bunch, at least in terms of overall moveset. She does a basic karate chop move, which doesn't sound like the most impressive, but she can also lasso moderate distant targets. While you'd think this would stun them, it seems the cowgirl scientist isn't taking any prisoners because she really puts the squeeze on them, making it a lethal lasso. She can also use her lasso as a helicopter glide, which when combined with the double jump they all share, really allows her to reach faraway locations. As if all that still wasn't enough, there are Texas trailer hitches you can latch on and swing off of, and you can also combo it with a glide. Doing that is very handy if you don't trust your swinging too much. Your main source of health is, believe it or not, underwear. I guess SpongeBob dirties up his underwear in shock when he gets hit and has to put on a fresh pair. You're not going to be finding underwear specific to Patrick or Sandy though, because they all use the same underwear system, and those two will actually comment on the weirdness of having to put on SpongeBob's underwear. You can also find golden underwear, which like heart containers from Zelda allows you to wear an additional pair. Don't ask me how a golden pair of underwear does this, but you know, it's not like a sentient bubble-blowing household sponge at the bottom of the sea is very realistic either. It's just something you gotta roll with down here in the deep blue sea. Counting the boss arenas and special areas, there's a total of 14 distinct maps in the game. When it comes to the purposes of collecting and exploring, that brings it down to just 11. Bikini Bottom is mostly a hub, so that sort of makes 10 other levels that you can roam about in. That doesn't sound like an especially large amount, but each level has different areas and multiple collectibles to snatch up, so it really doesn't feel overly short. Jellyfish Fields is your first level, so naturally you don't really need any golden spatulas to enter it. Noteworthy things about this level are that it's basically an introduction to platforming and you unlock Patrick Star. It comes with both outside areas and an interior cave to help break things up a bit. King Jellyfish is also on this level as a mini-boss, but I'll go into more details about enemies later. Downtown Bikini Bottom is the second level, requiring 5 golden spatulas, and this is where Sandy Cheeks first becomes playable. It also has a sea needle with platforming and bungeeing, so that's pretty nifty too. It even has a lighthouse with a bit of a semi-marathon of enemies in it that you have to survive through. Finally, there's a section where you have to jump from rooftop to rooftop as Sandy to net an antenna for Larry. Naturally, Goo Lagoon is primarily a beach level requiring 10 golden spatulas, but it too offers more than just one area. You've got the main beach area where you can do things like platform across pier support posts and redirecting reflectors to beam the sunlight onto a hammer robot. You can also rescue from kids floating around on balloons. Then there's a sandcastle section with rising goo, an interior cave, and even a pier that's basically a carnival on the docks. It has games like a slide and a skee ball you use Bubble Ball with for getting shiny objects. Rock Bottom, as you'd expect, takes place in complete darkness with only neon lights to cut through the void, requiring 25 golden spatulas to enter. You have a basic exterior area, a museum to navigate through, and then a trench of darkness. The museum is straight up covered in laser grids and you almost feel like a diamond thief navigating the security systems and making it to the other end to plunder the golden spatula. Funnily enough, you're also looking for museum paintings, so it's like you're playing both sides of it. But then those security measures are up by robots, so maybe you're just looking to take the museum back from them or something. The Mermalayer doesn't really require any golden spatulas, you just need to have beaten Robo Sandy. Located in Shady Shoals Rest Home, it's like the Batcave taken up to 11, but the robots have taken over. The areas aren't nearly as distinguishable as previous levels' areas, but there's still plenty to see in this level. It's one of those platforms hanging above a void kind of things, but it rarely becomes difficult to navigate. One of its main things is colored panels in certain places like the level's mini-boss. It's sort of like a traffic light, except you replace green with blue. In other words, blue panels are safe, yellow panels are about to change, and red ones will hurt you. It's pretty simple to figure out when you get down to it. In addition to the mini-boss, the level has some other interesting things like getting spin panels the right way or even doing a full-on Rube Goldberg machine. Overall, a nice, slightly complex level, and it contains the Prawn mini-boss. Sand Mountain requires 30 gold spatulas and is basically the racing level to end all racing levels. While navigating the lodge area is a thing, it's mostly competing racing challenges for Bubble Buddy, Mrs.Puff, and Larry, with each more challenging than the last. You also have some robots to smash the bottom of each for a golden spatula reward, so even if you fail the time, you have stuff to do at the bottom of it, so focusing on just making it through is still helpful. There's not as much to do as previous levels, but there probably doesn't need to be. It's the skiing race level, and it works just fine for what it is, and it can also be pretty challenging, especially Larry's race. The Kelp Forest requires 50 gold spatulas and is essentially the forest and goo area. The starting area mostly has Mrs. Puff asking you to help find campers, but the next area has you returning stone tikis to their podiums. This is easier said than done. You have to navigate around goo and the stone tikis will be returned to their original areas if you drop it in. It too has a cave system and you're tasked with finding 6 power crystals for Barnacle Boy in addition to hitting some buttons. There's another area just past the cave where you go down a kelp vine slide, so basically another racing challenge and you try to beat Mermaid Man's time. Overall, it's not a bad level at all. There's enough variety to keep it from getting stale, and the enemies at this point are becoming more of a threat to you. The Flying Dutchman's Graveyard requires the most gold spatulas apart from the final boss at a whopping 60. Naturally, it puts your platforming skills a bit more to the test with things like pushable blocks, wall jumping, and mildly precise platforming. This is especially true in the second area where you're navigating through more precise areas and even side-to-side wall jumping. Thankfully, Sandy's your other in this level and you can use her to help navigate in some areas by gliding through them. The crux of the matter is essentially a couple of battleships you have to use both Sandy and Spongebob to navigate around through. The Flying Dutchman also appears in this level as a mini-boss. However, the most difficult level for me by far was definitely SpongeBob's Dream. It really puts your platforming abilities on full tilt, especially the opening area. It's jammed full of spiked ends and moving platforms requiring some careful navigation to get through it all. It's a really good thing this game doesn't have a life system. I'm pretty sure even the generous amount of lives I accumulated in Super Mario Galaxy would be burned away really fast here. And above all that, you still have other characters' dreams to go through. Sandy's dream mostly consists of sliding and grappling, the main challenge being finding the actual right path to take you on your way. Squidward's dream is mostly platforming for musical notes and various jump pads, nothing too fancy but still requires a lot more precision than previous levels. Krabs' dream is genuinely pretty tough, with the tougher robots in the game and the Duplicatotrons you have to reach by platforming off of parts of Krabby Patties. Regenerating bubble shields around them prevent you from just using cruise bubbles, so you have no choice but to get close to them. That one may have taken me a little bit to get through. Of course, by far the hardest challenge in the game, nay any video game, is Patrick's Dream. This makes Dark Souls and I Want to Be the Guy look like walking simulators. You're pressed with a daunting task of finding the golden spatula that happens to be in Patrick's hand. In case you haven't figured it out, I was just bluffing. Count on Patrick to have the easiest golden spatula in the game because he couldn't come up with anything else. It reminds me of Wheatley's puzzle in Portal 2. It's just there as a joke, but the rest of the level is pressurized enough with difficulty that I appreciate the breezer golden spatula. Overall, it's quite a challenging level. It'll really put you to the test, even more so than the final boss in my opinion. I made the mistake of getting to it early in that section, making levels like the Kelp Forest almost seem like a joke in comparison, so save this one for the last real level if you want a proper difficulty curve. Your enemies throughout the game consists of robots as well as tikis, which I'm only going to assume are robots with tiki skins. Or maybe they came out of Squidward's imaginative tiki land and they developed a taste for blood. Either way, you've got your hands full taking on the various kinds of foes throughout the various landscapes of SpongeBob's abode. Tikis don't really move for the most part. They're mostly there for harvesting shiny objects or being used to get to new locations. Wood tikis are basically just piñatas waiting to get cracked open. Floating tikis float around in the air and are generally used for reaching items or locations. It's not uncommon to find some with underwear or something as an incentive for taking the risk to platform on them. Shh, tikis are big-eared cowards that hide into the ground when they hear someone approach. Ranged attacks and SpongeBob's sneak will make short work of them. Thunder tikis are the only ones that can deal direct damage. Touching them sets them on a timer to explode, which can be handy. Just don't strike them, that can actually cause them to instantly blow up. Stone tikis are often found near thunder tikis, as only them or SpongeBob's cruise missile is capable of destroying them. Stationary targets are all well and good, but the robots are essentially your true enemy. The most basic are, funnily enough, just called fodder. They'll try to tase you, but are easily taken care of with any attack. Just be mindful of their numbers. Next up is the hammer, creatively named for the ham-shaped appendage it likes to swing down on you. They're more durable than fodders, and their hammer attacks will hurt if they hit you, so just be careful of that and take them out. Tartars represent your basic ranged enemy, firing tartar sauce projectiles at you from a distance. Thankfully, the projectiles will warn you where they will land with targets on the ground so you can get away. They can also tank more than one hit, so your best bet is a slight hit and run on them. Jump-bots are little canine-like robots that hop around and try to bite you. Easily disposed of, but also has toxic breath, so be careful if it's poison gas. G-Love, creatively named for its multiple gloved arms, is a small UFO-like robot that will try to spin its gloved hands at you rapidly. They can't be taken out by basic attacks, so go all Mario on them with SpongeBob or Patrick's Ground Slam. Or Sandy's Kill Lasso, that'll also do the trick. The next robot is named Chuck, and its ability is to whip out missiles and chuck them at you. The missile also happens to come with splash damage though, so definitely be careful of being hit. Retaliating with a little range of your own is your best bet, so cruise missile, thrown fruit, or lasso depending on who you're playing as. Monsoons are little robots wielding an umbrella and a flying bike, summoning a dark cloud to attempt to zap you with electricity. They take a little time to charge up the cloud, so your best bet is to rush them from below with SpongeBob's Bubble Bash before they have a chance to shock you. Naturally, Patrick and Sandy will have to use the fruit and lasso. No prizes for figuring out what the bomb bot does. I say, old chum, that is quite the stereotype. They merely fix you a pot of tea, allow you to read a book with them, and write poems for you. Nah, they're essentially a robotic bomb. It'll follow you and try to explode. You can trigger it to blow by attacking it, but mind the blast radius. Sleeping time bots are somewhat unique. They're large sleeping robots with a flying alarm clock casting light above them. This light is a motion-sensitive alarm, causing them to awaken and fire deadly lasers at you if you're detected. SpongeBob can sneak in and either get past or attack them. Just be careful if you encounter a group, as their light will often overlap, and one can easily be alerted if you're attacking one within another's bubble. As always, ranged attacks will do wonders here. The ARF is one bad hombre, a cowboy-type robot carrying what looks like a little doghouse. He'll melee you with a doghouse and float away from you if you're dealing damage to him. They also use the doghouse to summon ARF dogs that are somewhat similar to bomb bots in that they'll try to chase you and blow up on you. The Bzzz bot may have a funny sounding name, but you don't want to get caught up in its laser attack. The laser ray may seem harmless at first, but it will damage you if you stay in it a short while. Really best dealt with from above since they aim it downwards. Tublets are robots that wear a floaty and hang around in a group of 3 vertically. Basically, they fire a flamethrower, and if you don't kill all 3 of them in a hurry, smashed ones will respawn in the formation. The best way I've seen for beating them is be SpongeBob off the first one, then Bubble Bash them from below to take out the other 2 before the first one respawns again. Perhaps the most troublesome normal enemy of the game is the Slick, so named because it blows oil bubbles at you sort of like an evil SpongeBob. They possess an oil bubble shield around them that will regenerate after some time has passed, so you'll need to beat them quickly after popping it. Cruise missiles are pretty handy if you're quick about it. Your number 1 priority, though, will be the Duplicatotrons. They're small manufacturing units that, depending on the level, spawn all sorts of different robots, and they constantly spawn new ones in when the current ones are destroyed. If you don't want to be overrun, seek and destroy immediately, preferably with ranged attacks. In addition to robots, you may also encounter jellyfish. They can be dispatched with 1 hit, although blue jellyfish have 2 hit points rather than 1, but they have an electrical attack you should be wary of. And speaking of jellyfish, the king jellyfish shows up as a mini-boss. Being the first real threat apart from common enemies, he's fairly straightforward but still requires you to be pretty quick on your feet. He attacks with a ground slam that produces shockwaves that's probably pretty standard in these kind of games. Just jump over at the right time and be wary of the jellyfish he spawns and give him a smack until he goes down. There's actually a mini-boss that I never fought against in my Let's Play of the game since you don't require every single golden spatula, but I suppose I should probably bring it up here. The mini-boss in question is actually called Prawn, apparently Mermaid Man's arch-nemesis. So forget about the dirty bubble or especially Man Ray, clearly Mermaid Man's greatest foe is a tiny shrimp. This little terror from below attacks with sound waves and later by summoning hammers, and you beat him by rolling a bubble bowl down changing color panels when they're all white.
Yar, the Flying Dutchman be the final mini-boss of BFBB, and this old sea dog be sailing at you with a bit of the old eye-beams and fire breath. If ye wish not to feed the fish, then ye'd best avoid these attacks and lasso his eel-like appendage, for you can achieve success and claim your booty. And now I can quit talking like a pirate, although it'd be a wee bit fun, I must confess.
Seriously though, it's time for the primary bosses of this game, and they're all mandatory. Interestingly enough, each main boss is actually a robotic variant of a main character. The first up is Robo Sandy. If it were me, I'd have gone with Patrick first, but oh well. The first phase involves the robot trying to do a karate chop as well as a butt bounce. The latter bounces you up in the air, at which point you're best served countering with one of your own. Land close enough and its head will go flying, getting zapped by the lighting fixtures above. The robot will get a bit more aggressive as you go, like try to shoulder slam you, but it's nothing you can't handle. It's not over just yet though, and SpongeBob relents to Patrick's insisting so the second round has you playing as him. It's mostly the same, but the lighting fixture fell to the ground, so you have to detach Robo Sandy's head and then throw it at the fixture, but it's basically the same concept ultimately. The robot will add bouncing off the ropes at you with spring legs that spread out to the sides you have to jump over. Keep doing that and you're up to round 3 where SpongeBob will tag in yet again. Phase 3 is where Robo Sandy will obviously be hitting the hardest, the rope bounce even having twin springs that you have to jump between to avoid damage. The robot is caught on and will try to keep its head from you, but you can just bubble bash it from below. Just keep up the pressure and you'll have it down for good. All in all, it was a nice introduction for the main bosses, and the escalation can keep you on your toes if you're not careful. Robo Patrick is your next main boss, of course. His main attack is just an ice cream cone that'll spit the contents of at you in addition to just doing a spin attack that spreads them all over the place. Now I know what you're thinking, gee, that doesn't sound very intimidating, spitting ice cream at me, but the ice cream is actually nuclear waste, so you really don't want to get hit by it. As with Tartars though, you get a nice little bullseye to announce where they'll land. His weakness really isn't that hard to figure out, he straight up has a kick me sign on his back. Yeah, sounds about right. Keep it up and SpongeBob becomes a stiff. Not dead of course, just frozen, so Sandy has to take up round 2. Phase 2 seems like more of the same, but with Sandy until the center of the arena fills with toxic waste, so you're forced onto the sides. More toxic waste is added with subsequent hits until the third one when SpongeBob and Squidward are thawed out. Yeah, the reason that they're there fighting the Robo Patrick in the first place is because Squidward was frozen at the beginning of it, but this begins Phase 3 with SpongeBob again. The arena is completely covered in toxic waste, save for a main platform, 2 small ones, and conveyor belts. Robo Patrick will also use a freezing breath on you. Just fire some bubble blows at the kick me sign and Robo Patrick will finally explode. I'd say you blew his mind, but what mind is there really to blow? Naturally, the finale boss is a robotic version of the titular sponge himself named Spongebob Squarepants. As if that wasn't enough, you also have to deal with Robo Plankton, but mostly Spongebob. Spongebob is basically karate SpongeBob and attacks accordingly with side sweeps. You'll have to pop all the green nodes planted across its body like zits with things like bubble slams on the hands and cruise bubbles everywhere else. As the fight drags on, he'll use karate chops straight down and even vocalize karate that attack the platforms you're forced to jump across. It can be surprisingly tricky to get an opportunity to use the cruise bubbles since, as I mentioned, they'll leave you vulnerable. But this is the final boss, of course, so I wouldn't expect any less. After popping the node, SpongeBob's arms are blown off, but it grows a meaty pair of anchor arms. Apparently this was supposed to be an actual phase of the boss, but it was snuffed out, so instead Robo Plankton flees into the bot's head and SpongeBob follows him in, leading to the actual phase 2. The second phase is a marathon run of sorts inside SpongeBob's head where you have to hop across floating platforms and utilizing jump pads while robots come after you, both in the form of Duplicatotrons and Robo Plankton himself. While you fend them off, you have to destroy glass tubes in an attempt to shut down SpongeBob. The final bit may have taken me a little while to actually figure out, but the final stretch has small tunnels in the core you have to send cruise missiles through as they open up to destroy the last few glass tubes within. Do this and SpongeBob's decommissioned for good, and while this doesn't technically stop Roboplankton, he sorta stops himself. Either way, that day is saved and the game is over, but this is a collectathon game, so it doesn't just end there. SpongeBob points out that they have to clean up the remaining bots, so that allows you to continue playing to pick up anything you may have missed. All in all, the gameplay is fairly tight to say the least. The character changing mechanic sorta reminds me of Donkey Kong 64, but you only have 2 people per level, so you're nowhere near as pressed to switch up nearly as much. This isn't really a make things easier or more convenient remake, but to be honest, I don't think the game's anywhere near as dated as some others would lead you to believe. Really, it's impossible to permanently lose, so in that sense it's sorta like the Simpsons game, and there's enough variety that it doesn't get too stale. Some parts of the game really had me sweating, and I kind of appreciated that. One of my pet peeves in a game is one that forces you to go through a lot of filler to get back to spots, and this game mostly avoids that. When you get down to it, it's essentially a GameCube-era platformer given a fresh coat of paint. I really enjoyed it for what it's worth, but even though it's a game about the kid-friendly SpongeBob, don't expect it to be mindless. It will push your platforming skills enough to be engaging without being too frustrating, which in that sense it sort of succeeds in living up to Mario games. As one would probably expect from a SpongeBob game, this isn't exactly Kingdom Hearts levels of complexity or convoluted plot. Essentially, Plankton attempts to build a robotic army to take over Bikini Bottom, but being himself, he forgets to set them to obey. Thus, they revolt against Plankton and just raise amok all over the place. Meanwhile, SpongeBob and Patrick are playing with toys, and SpongeBob expresses an interest in having real robots to play with. Patrick suggests putting the robot toy into what he calls a magic wishing shell. I think you can see where this is going, because SpongeBob awakes to find his house in shambles and soon learns about the robot uprising. He quickly assumes it's his own fault for wishing for real robots and thus wants to correct his non-error. Most of the levels aren't really related to the main plot, however. They're non-sequiturs, which if you think about it sounds a lot like episodes of SpongeBob to begin with. For instance, Jellyfish Fields involves you getting soothing jelly from King Jellyfish because Squidward was badly stung by jellyfish. Obviously, the robots factor in, such as Goo Lagoon having you assisting with beachgoers' tans by getting rid of a robot, assisting Mr.Krabs with clearing out his pure carnival setup of robots, and things of that sort. I've already covered most of the stuff you actually do in the gameplay section, like the Mermalayer being hacked by robots and Prawn, as well as campers going missing in the kelp forest. Some things to note, though, are the Poseidon that was taken over by Robo Sandy where that fight takes place, and you're taking it for King Neptune. Robo Patrick is fought in the industrial park because it froze Squidward. Eventually, they all make it into the chum bucket where Plankton reveals the truth behind it all. After trying to flip it back into Obey, he humorously just throws an Obey sticker over the Do Not Obey side. It's revealed from Robo-Plankton that they're only obeying him and that Plankton in all of his ego-driven madness made a robotic version of himself. After being SpongeBob, I mentioned Robo-Plankton beats himself. You get your mind out of the gutter. What I meant is that he makes copies of himself, which would sound devastating to have an army of robotic Planktons. However, much like Rapture and Bioshock, having a lot of egomaniacs in one room tends to not work out very well. They start fighting among themselves, presumably now too distracted with wanting each other dead than to pose any further threat to Bikini Bottom. Plankton declares he'll get it right next time, Patrick obliviously steps on him, and the day is saved, although you still have to clean up the robots, so that's your explanation for being able to play more of the game. Yeah, I don't know if this was obvious, but SpongeBob wasn't exactly going to be the bastion of plots, and nobody would ever want it to be. It doesn't need to be bogged down with some convoluted plot about saving the world from dark organizations and all that weird stuff. It's a very simple show for a very simple and young target demographic. What's important is that it maintains a silly charm that I'm sure fans of the show, both old and new, will appreciate. One might say that it feels like a season of SpongeBob, with each level serving as episodes. Well, you know, if a season of SpongeBob were kind of like an anime in that it had an overarching goal, in this case stopping the robots, it works just fine for what it is, and the SpongeBob-style humor really carries through. As with Rise of the Triad, this remake will obviously be judged mostly by how well it improves the presentation. After all, it hardly touches the gameplay and plot, so this is going to be the real reason to play it over the original versions. Obviously, having more polygons and better texture quality is a given, but it still very much shines through here. Clearly, having better hardware than over 16 years prior is going to result in a much more polished image overall. More details added to the environment, especially grass, and it actually defies the Real's brown trope by making it a much more colorful and brighter looking game than the original. Between having a brighter and more color-saturated look, it's certainly much more cartoony looking than the original, which I'd say is probably a plus given it's supposed to be based off of a colorful and bright cartoon. You've got the usual things you can expect by now, like some decent environmental shadows, bloom, fake light rays, and things like that really add to the look of the game. Particle effects are definitely persistently displayed throughout the game, mostly bubbles from SpongeBob's attacks as well as in the levels themselves. The game has subtle particles moving through the world, which reminds me a little of Soma, that really sells the illusion that you're underwater a bit better. Nick930 even pointed out a detail I didn't even notice, levels visible from other levels in the distance. I can't believe I'm actually comparing this game to Dark Souls 3, but that's one thing I really loved about it, and it really makes the areas feel interconnected rather than just segmented levels. One change that might be a bit divisive though is the design and portrait changes. The character designs, as others like Nick930 brought up, are based more on modern SpongeBob than the original that's more classic designs. I really didn't have a problem with them and honestly didn't really notice them myself. The designs aren't that different and it's usually poor writing rather than changes in design that makes fans less than appreciative of some newer episodes. Many depicted portraits and paintings are replaced with memes and my response is an more than anything else. I understand the people who are less than pleased, like it's trying to replace the art from the original game, but honestly not that much was lost in my opinion. Like handsome Squidward replacing a picture of two random fish, who's honestly gonna miss that? There are also other little touches that I certainly enjoyed that are actually both in this and the original. For instance, going out of bounds will cause a large long-sleeved hand to grab SpongeBob and place him back into the proper game zone. In addition, the realistic fish head will narrate the boss fights and really goes a long way with making everything a spectacle. I mentioned in my Donkey Kong 64 review that I really enjoyed the boxing ring spectacle feel of the final fight, and this game's first boss, Robo Sandy, happens to take place in a very similar arena, and I love it. Audio-wise, the game isn't nearly as drastically improved, but that's to be expected. Unlike Rise of the Triad, this isn't coming from an era of such limited storage space and audio capabilities. The original also had voice acting throughout it, and the music and audio quality weren't really that noticeably lower either. That being said, the voice acting is mostly spot on and just fine. Mr.Krabs and Mermaid Man very noticeably have different voice actors, which is especially jarring for Mr.Krabs.
Well, this be carried over from the original BFBB. It's a real shame it wasn't addressed in the remake because it sounds weirdly out of place.
Apart from that, though, the audio is just fine with me. The music really does sound a lot like music that could be from the show, and Downtown Bikini Bottoms is probably the most recognizable, at least to me, but they all sound pretty poppy. Funnily enough, SpongeBob's Dream level actually has the same music as mini-boss fights, which is funny since the whole level is challenging enough that I can say it's like one big drawn-out boss fight. All around, the music is a blast to listen to and really carries forth the mood of every level very well, such as Rock Bottom having arguably the most tense of the music. Overall, the presentation can be seen as a mixed bag in some regards, but I'd say it's overall very excellent. Nothing they changed actually struck to me as being in poor faith, unlike some other games or movies for that matter that try to reboot or remake an existing franchise. Injecting memes may seem controversial, but it was clearly done with the fans in mind, so I can easily be understanding. It's also not entirely perfect in that there are cracks in it like the two off replacement voices, but I'd still recommend rehydration from a presentation standpoint. It really does look like an earnest effort to make SpongeBob into a sort of DreamWorks-styled CG game, which is probably about as much as you can hope for. It's quite detailed with some realistic specular highlights while also being colorful and stylized enough to feel like a living, breathing cartoon. What I'm saying is that presentation easily gets a thumbs up from me. Alright, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I didn't exactly grow up with the original. I played a little bit of the GameCube version on this channel recently, but mostly it was untouched by me until the remake came out. I even considered doing the original in full until I learned about this remake that was being made. Even with what little I saw of the GameCube version, I can tell this is a labor of love and a very faithful remake. Now this game is straight up a graphics remake, some might even call it a remaster, although I think a complete graphics overhaul makes remake an appropriate word. It seeks to copy the gameplay to a T, and that's just fine with me, although it probably actually helps that I didn't play the original much because it means this felt completely fresh to me. On its own merits, it's a very fun and at times pretty challenging platformer that manages to take a similar gameplay formula from Mario and put a SpongeBob spin on it. It's hardly the best game ever, or even on the top list of 3D platformers, but it manages to shine above a sea of honestly fairly crappy licensed games. I had a blast with it and I highly recommend it to anyone who's a fan of SpongeBob Squarepants, 3D Mario games, or just 3D platforming games in general. It might also help if you're an appreciator of 3D collectathons like Banjo-Kazooie. There's a lot of fun to be had in this variant of Bikini Bottom under the sea. This has been my review of SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe and bubble punch that bell icon if you want to keep notified of my content. A like always helps, but as always, go out there and capitalize on life. Peace out, have a good one, and have a nice and pleasant day, landlubber.